Serious, Redditors who've been 100% certain they're about to die. What was going through your head at that moment? When I was in college, I got held up at gunpoint at Half Price Books of all places. I wasn't scared of dying. I just remember thinking that I hoped it wouldn't be hard to find my body. I didn't want my parents to be put through that. They ended up letting me go when a few other people came out of the store and called the cops. I told my dad once about the thoughts I had in those 5 minutes. He teared up and told me to never tell my mom. I actually fell 16 feet at one point through a shoddy football stadium onto concrete. I basically slipped on nachos and went through an opening. Nowadays I know that people can survive that, but in my head as I was falling, everything was in slow motion and I thought, man, this is a really stupid way to die. Man, I'm so stupid. Trying to save a drowning woman. She was big and panicking, so she was pushing me down trying to keep herself above water. After struggling for quite a while I started to go under the water. All I thought about was my 3 young kids at home aren't going to have a dad and I feel so foolish trying to save this lady. Weirdest feeling. I swam to the surface and we made one last push for the shore. Someone caught us halfway back. We both made it and I laid on the shore and vomited. I was 10 minutes into a 3-hour flight and seated in the back row next to the toilet. There was a huge bang. The lights in the cabin flickered and dimmed. The plane wobbled hard in the air. I could smell smoke instantly, and a near-deafening bad engine sound started up. I looked over at the flight attendant who was still strapped to the fold-down seat right next to me. She has a look of pure terror on her face. That's when I knew I was going to die. I was profoundly pissed off. I thought, Rick, this is how I go. Now I thought about all of the crap I made it through in life and really regretted that I wouldn't get to continue that progress. I was mad that I was going to die when traveling for work. I thought about trying to text the people I love, but didn't want to mess with the navigation systems of the plane in case there was some way we could survive. We had lost an engine because we struck a goose. The plane turned around and returned to the airport easily and safely, as we still had 3 of 4 engines. It always cheers me up to know that I will never be flying anywhere where we can't reach an airfield if we lost an engine. Even a twin-engine airliner like the 777 can get home from over the North Pole on just the one. You're in a pickle with a total engine failure, but they're so rare they're not worth worrying about as a passenger. I was in Tokyo on the metro, in a long tunnel. My phone and everyone else's phone in the car went off at full volume. It was the earthquake warning system. 9.1 magnitude quake. Coming in 13 seconds. Protect your head. There wasn't any time. The train bounded forward, suddenly at full power, apparently in an effort to escape the tunnel and give us a sliver of hope. No one in the car said a word. I thought, this is really going to be something. I knew that even if I survived the initial shock, I'd be trapped in a tunnel. If we'd gotten out, I'd die eventually anyway just by being surrounded by flooded, raised megacity. It was a false alarm. The system had never misfired before that day. A 9.1 earthquake under Tokyo Bay would have decimated the city first and then washed away the loose ends with a series of aftershocks and tsunamis. Coming in 13 seconds. That's terrifying. Why won't he help me? I was in a swimming pool when I was maybe 9/10. My brother, who was about 6 at the time, couldn't swim and he was attempting to hold himself above the water by pushing me beneath it. We were both struggling to stay afloat, screaming for help, and a man was stood on the bridge smiling at us. I don't think he spoke English, and maybe he thought we were just playing around, but he didn't bat an eyelid. That was the Grim Reaper dude. I was taken to hospital for extremely low blood pressure. The only thing I could think of was, wow, this is peaceful. Had no idea how close to death I was at the time. A doc later told me that if I had waited 20 minutes to come to the ER I would not have survived. Had a similar experience with a ruptured appendix. Only, it wasn't so much me waiting as the ambulance driver wheeled me back out to the waiting room after they asked me intake questions and left me there for a half an hour. I was in surgery less than 20 minutes after that. Can't honestly say I thought it was peaceful, though. I was in Iraq working as security for EOD, bomb disposal. Our army team had rotated back to the States and we were now working with an Air Force team. They were blowing up some unexploded ordnance and they placed the charge wrong, which caused a 155mm LM round, big flaming artillery shell full of white phosphorus, to be launched at my Humvee. I'm standing in the gunner's hatch watching this ball of fiery death fly my way, and all I can think is that I managed to survive insurgents for over a year and I'm going to get killed by the Air Force after only a week. You would have been that guy they used to scare new recruits. Glad you're okay though. I fainted, flying off the highway after we hit a patch of ice. After we spun a few times and were heading for the edge of the highway, and I knew that we were going off and that I was about to die. Out I went, rolled a few times and landed in a snowbank. I came to hanging upside down, banged up a bit but still alive, much to my surprise. Fainting may have helped you escape more serious injury, oddly enough. I fell down a rock face some years ago. It probably only took a few seconds tops, but it felt like ages. My mind was racing, thinking what to do while simultaneously panicking so hard that I couldn't do even the most basic thing. That day I learned that when in mortal peril, I won't have any bright ideas to save my life. I also won't have any cool last words, but I will let out a rather unmanly whimper. In your defense, you fell down a rock face. Not like there's anything but nothing on the way down. I was about 10 years old and down at the beach with my brothers. The waves coming in were pretty decent. 2 foot at shore, 3 or 4 foot further out. My brothers were good swimmers, so they headed straight out to the back with their surfboards. I was stuck on the 2-footers with a scrappy foam rectangle board. I decided to try a bigger wave and instant regret set in. The board flipped forward, knocking me off, and the water was no longer shallow enough for my feet to touch the bottom. I tried making my way to shore, but the water was pulling me back. Every time I surfaced, I was met with a wave to the face and a mouthful of seawater. Every time I went under, all I could hear was the peaceful bloop 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 sound you hear when cameras go underwater with microphones. I was in full panic mode and was sure I would drown until I felt something under me pushing me to the surface. I couldn't think and was still in survival mode, clawing upwards to keep my head above water. As this thing under me kept pushing, I realized I was moving closer to the shore, and suddenly the giant waves were now 2-footers again. That's when I planted my feet into the sand and bolted to the shore, crying my eyes out. Turns out the thing under me was my brother's friend who had been at the beach. He told me he was under me trying to put me on his shoulders, and my kicking made it much harder for him. He was only 2 years older than me, but god dang if he hadn't been there, I wouldn't be here today probably. To answer Arp's question specifically, it was terrifying. Being underwater felt isolated because you can't hear anything, and once your head goes above you hear the waves crashing, people laughing, playing near you, and I felt alone and scared out of my mind. I may have been crying, screaming, but I don't remember. It was all mostly shock that I was dying. May have been a riptide. I got caught in one and sucked out about 50 meters. Same story. Totally would have died if a surfer hadn't happened to be out there, haha. First ambush I was ever in Afghanistan, 2012. I had been to Iraq and been through a few firefights and IEDs, but this was different in many ways. First off, the fighters in Afghanistan were a lot more tenacious in firefighting. They normally stuck around and maneuvered on us all the way up until either they figured they had lost too many fighter or air support showed up. But this was my first real contact against them. What started the whole thing off was what seemed like a barrage of RPG fire. Seemed like 10-15 all fired in rapid succession, and they fired them all down our line of dismounted soldiers and vehicles. Then came the AK and PKM machine gun fire. It was relentless and accurate. While my position was not receiving contact at the time, I immediately got a call that 3 of my soldiers were pinned down, receiving fire from 2 different directions from about 75 meters away. So I made a decision and told my squad we were going to support them. Here's the kicker. I'm pretty sure they baited us. As soon as we grouped up and started maneuvering to help, we immediately came under withering PKM fire, like they knew exactly where we were going to come from to support them. In 2 conflicts, I've never had so many rounds impact next to, over and around me than I did at that particular moment. The crack snap of a bullet traveling at supersonic speeds as it flies past you from a near miss is a terrifying sound, and one I will never forget. Miraculously, we all got past this linear danger area without getting shot, and dove into a wadi stream bed that had us undercover. I really think that the dude on the other end of the machine gun had too many targets to choose from and just fired wantonly, hoping to land a shot. I had one soldier with a bullet hole through equipment, and 2 more, including myself, with bullet fragments in various places, but no casualties. I've been through many near-death situations before and after, but this one sticks in my mind for some reason. I was in Afghanistan. We had been loading up some aerial flares. They are used to light up an entire battlefield. We have to stuff them into the pods with a big butt metal pole because a crap ton of them go into a pod. I'm talking we had at least 2-3 full pod loads ready in the building that we're working out of, and the pods are on trailers. So we're stuffing these things in, which are like 3 feet long, and the guy holding the pole drops it, which knocks off the initiator cap. So here we are, like 8 of us, and we hear the countdown buzzing off. So instantly it's all frick. We raise alarm, start telling everyone to get out now. I know we got max 30 seconds to go. The first guy who gets to the door is freaking fiddling with it and can't open it. So I push him out the way, open the door, and we get out. I start running for the first bunker since I know I sure as crap can't make it to the second bunker, which everyone else continued on to. So I got to the first bunker and just said, frick it. If I'm gonna die, I wanna see some cool crap at least. It didn't detonate, and then we found out that not only did the cap have to initiate, but it also has to have pressure from the canopy as it's floating slowly down. We just taped on the cap and continued on like nothing. It also has to have pressure from the canopy as it's floating slowly down. Someday you need to find the engineer that designed the redundancies and buy him a beer. It was around 10 years ago in December. I was playing ice hockey and I have a guy I shove, and somehow his skate came up and sliced my neck open. I remember falling to the ground and holding my neck with my hockey glove. Then all the guys from both teams started throwing their towels over to me. I looked around and there was nothing but blood around me. His skate had hit the artery in my neck. I lay there thinking that my life was going to end. I started thinking of the flights with my grandfather in his Beechcraft Bonanza and all the talks we had, and how I wasn't really going to be experiencing anything anymore. Just around that time, a guy that worked at the rink named Eldrin ran onto the ice and started propping my head and telling me a story back when he was in Vietnam and a guy in his platoon got a similar injury. Then he told me he didn't make it, so that was amplifying my thoughts. What seemed like a minutes later, the fire department was trying to get onto the ice. I thought I would be dead if I didn't get off the ice and over to where they were, because they were slipping and sliding all over the place. So my dumb butt gets onto my feet and skates off the ice right over to the stretcher, and they started getting all my equipment off. I have a leopard skin goalie cup that I have had since I saw it, and it's my favorite piece of equipment because guys will always talk about how badass it is. They wanted to cut it off. I told them no way in heck. I am whisked away in the ambulance and they are constantly reading out my stats. Little did I know how low they were due to loss of blood. We get to the first hospital and the doctor says I can't do that. My mind is just like, what the freak, you're a doctor, you should be able to stitch me back up and I would be home in a few. Then we call the next hospital and they said that they don't have that kind of trauma doctor there. So we drive to the hospital downtown. I remember that they already had the OR prepped for me. Crazy thing was, I was apologizing to them for fricking up their night. I remember praying with a nurse and saying call my grandparents at their house. Gave them their number and asked if something happened to tell them that I loved them. I awoke and I was still alive. I later learned that I had 30 seconds worth of blood in my body or I wouldn't be typing right now. First time I have written on Reddit. Reading out my stats. Damn it, Johnson. He's got a .930 save percentage. There's no way we can let him die. Had a really crappy boyfriend in college start hitting me around the neck and head with a cat scratching post, the kind that's just a pole on a heavy base. I remember hoping that he would at least call the police so that my mom would know what happened to me, and being scared that he would bury somewhere and lie about it so they would never find me. Then I blacked out and woke up in the shower. He tried to convince me that I had slipped and fallen. Please tell me they put that psycho away for attempted murder. That slow motion feeling is real. Your mind is trying to process, but it seems surreal. Wow, lots of great feedback. It is hard to imagine such a universal feeling. Yes, I was driving way too fast on an old country road and flew off into a field of crops. Time passed so slow and my vision was so sharp. I could watch bits of plant matter fly in one window and out the other. It was pretty awesome, especially since I didn't die or get hurt. Lost the car though. Unfamiliar road. Early morning. I was late for school and decided to take what I hoped was a shortcut and take it at unadvisable speeds. Black ice. 40 miles an hour. Heading towards a T intersection with a huge oak tree directly on the opposite side of the road. The brakes, they do nothing. This was 1989. My car was an emerald green 1972 Ford Pinto. It barely had seat belts. Airbags weren't even science fiction yet. I am going to die. This realization, the certainty that these are the last seconds I have on Earth, floods my system with adrenaline. Instantly, the air feels like it drops 30 degrees and presses on me 3 times as hard. My last thought is that my mother is going to be so disappointed with me. But 2 other things happen. I become extremely calm, and the world slows to a crawl. I can see the dusk motes in the air catching the morning light, the varied colors and types of flowers in the pots flanking the driveway of the house on the corner to my right. I can no longer hear my cassette deck. It suddenly feels like I have all the time in the world to figure a way out of this. And I do. I crank the steering wheel hard left, putting me into a spin, and then try to push the accelerator pedal through the floor when the nose of my car is facing the way I came. The fates are kind. It works, bleeding off most of the car's speed, and then the engine dies and I roll backwards into the driveway I'd seen a few hours, or heartbeats, ago and brake to a stop. I sit there shaking for 20 minutes. I missed my classes that day, and I've never driven that road again. My last thought would have been, oh man, I'm going to die in a freaking Pinto. Disgustingly, that I didn't care if those around me were killed just as long as I got out alive. The knowledge of that being my thought process at the time has haunted me my entire life. After people asking, I was in a national safari park at night in Zimbabwe with some friends on a school trip, aged around 15-16. We were told not to walk around at night because of honey badgers and other dangerous animals, but we wanted to go and see the watering hole at night, so decided to ignore that advice. So we start walking towards the watering hole in almost pitch black save a few lamps here and there. Halfway to the watering hole we heard a bush rustle around 5 meters from the path we were walking on, followed by an unmistakable lion's roar. None of us either bother to look and all run madly towards the watering hole where we know there's a fence. I've never run so fast in my life. All I remember is being terrified I'd trip over my flip-flops and wishing that the lion would go for one of the people behind me and not for me. It's that final thought that fricks with me. The next morning we went and saw that 2-3 meters from the path there was a fence that in the darkness we couldn't see. Obviously the lion was directly behind the fence. I think the majority of people feel like this if they are honest with themselves. It is our survival instinct. One day when I was briefly home alone at 13, I jumped into my backyard pool wearing a t-shirt over my bathing suit. My shirt had a very tight neck, but it was just the shirt I happened to chuck over my bathers, and as I jumped into the water, the shirt inverted over my head and suction tight around my face. I immediately felt so much panic and tried to rip the shirt off every way I could. But the combination of the suction power and the tight neckline made me start to see bright white lights and get lazy in my struggle to remove the shirt. I felt pain in my chest and realized I was literally just staring at the light holding my breath. With a huge final effort I ripped the thing over my head and threw it as far away as I could, taking in a massive breath and looking everywhere for my parents. Then I remembered they were out very briefly, and that's all it could have taken to come home to a drowned child. Then it hit me how silent the whole thing was. Nobody would have heard me fighting to get this shirt off my face, because it was underwater. I cried and never told them. In January of 2015, I got caught on a burning public transit train. The fuse on the track had burnt out and we were waiting for the train to get power again so we could get moving. Then the whole thing suddenly went up in flames. Everyone was panicking, but I remember sitting there thinking, I guess this is how I go. Totally calm, absolute peace. It was in that moment that 18-year-old me was 100% okay with dying. Someone managed to pry open an emergency exit and then the adrenaline kicked in, so I got out without any injuries. But looking back, I'm still a bit shaken by my response to the whole thing. 1. A few commenters asked me if this was in DC. Nope, this was in Cleveland, Ohio, and the press never reported what happened as a major headline. I remember going online and thumbing through newspapers only to find absolutely nothing. And there had been people on the phone with a few media outlets and clear right after emergency services got there. I left as soon as I saw that everyone had gotten out safe and had a very shaken walk home. So to everybody, in January 2015, there was a massive train fire in Cleveland, and nobody knows about it. Some 50 people almost died because of a crappy public transit malfunction. 2. Why was the emergency exit so hard to pry open? The Cleveland RTA trains are notoriously old and badly functioning. The operators probably couldn't tell you the last time there's been a safety check of the vehicles they drive. There was a similar fire in April 2014 that I found while researching train fires in Cleveland after the incident, and almost no Cleveland-based newspapers' media sources reported on it. I found like one local news video : "This may or may not be relevant, but I work in hospice and death is a very regular thing. Whether or not this contributed to me sort of accepting my impending death or if it was just a traumatic response is up in the air." I, 15YO, was in a head-on collision in the middle of a turn on a country road in high school. I was being driven by my older girlfriend who was mad at me and driving recklessly, coming around a blind corner about 20 miles per hour over the limit. There was tall grass on the inside of the turn preventing loss on the other side. We met another SUV in the middle of the road. I remember time seemingly slowing down. I didn't have my seatbelt on and I remember reaching across her with my left and reaching for the OS handle with my right hand. The most bizarre part was due to the angle of the accident, for a split second I was face to face with the other driver before impact. I'll never forget locking eyes with her and seeing the panic in her face. After the initial impact the other car stopped, but we glanced off, spun sideways, and when the tires caught the grass on the side of the road we began to roll. The turn was near a fairly steep hill with a creek at the bottom. The SUV slowly rolled down the hill as I continued to hold onto the OS handle and my GF for dear life. I remember hearing the windows exploding and seeing the pillar in front of me crushing in towards me. We finally came to rest with the driver's side in the creek and water flowing in. It wasn't very deep, so I knew we'd be fine. I helped push my GF out of my window as the doors obviously couldn't be opened. My GF hurt her neck, so I took her to a spot away from the car and walked up the hill to a nearby house. I checked on the other driver who was scared but okay. After making sure 911 had been called, I helped my GF up the hill and we waited for emergency services and my father to come. During that time I still remember realizing how many times I assumed I was dead. The impact, the repeated rolls. But oddly enough it was a sense of peace. A year or so earlier my aunt had died after a long fight with cancer, and I learned early to not fear death as it was unpredictable and was pointless to be scared of. It wasn't until I heard a police officer ask how many people died and until I saw the fear in my father's eyes that I broke down. My dad was a single parent and half my best friend, half my authority figure. As his only child I realized then, even more now, that he was afraid he was coming upon the side of the death of his only offspring. TLDR. I felt peace in the moment. I felt complete dread, sadness, fear afterwards. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.